Tonight, we're getting new insight into what Marine veteran Paul Whelan faced during more than 5 years behind bars in Russia. And that insight coming from the ex-prisoner himself. 6 years ago this week, Whelan was in Russia for a friend's wedding. That is when he was arrested by the FSB intelligence agency in Russia and then imprisoned on charges of espionage, charges he has always vehemently denied. In May of 2020, the U.S. State Department designated him as being wrongfully detained. The following month, he was convicted in a Russian court and sentenced to 16 years in prison, then transferred from Moscow to a remote prison camp. And that's where he led a personal campaign for his freedom, even making several phone calls and writing letters to a CNN reporter. This past August, the U.S. government secured his release in one of the largest prison swaps since the Cold War. And last month, Whelan sat down with Anderson and with CNN's Jennifer Hansler, the State Department reporter whom he reached out to from Russian captivity. Here's that interview.
Well, first of all, it's an honor to meet you. I'm so sorry for what happened. And what is it like being back?
Well, thanks for having me, Anderson. It's an honor for me, too. I've been a fan for years. Being back, it's surreal. I'm in a world that used to be familiar, and it isn't. I'm getting used to just simple things.
You were held in a prison in Moscow initially, which is a notorious, it's a high, like maximum security prison, I think. It's a very notorious prison.
Yeah, Lefordova. It's called the shooting gallery because that's where the Russians used to and probably still do shoot their own people. It's a horrendously old, run-down facility, and you're in a small cell by yourself, basically 23 hours a day.
How long were you in that facility?
For a year and a half.
I cannot imagine suddenly from being in your hotel room, visiting your friend for a wedding, to being in this notorious prison. How do you mentally not just panic and freak out?
I probably did panic and freaked out. Very quickly, I realized that what was happening was real. There was some solace in the fact that I knew my ambassadors would be coming to find out what was happening. I wasn't sure how long it would take to resolve. I knew I hadn't done anything. I hadn't violated the espionage law. I'm not a spy. I never have been. They'd either made a mistake or they were making it up.
After the trial, you were sentenced like 16 years, I think?
Right, yeah.
You were sent to a labor camp in Mordovia, and you're still, for the next 3-4 years, you are woken up every 2 hours at night.
Yeah, I was an escape risk, apparently. Mordovia, there's nothing out there. It's woods, it's forests.
And so what, they would come in, wake you up, and what?
They'd shine a light in my eyes and then take a picture with a camera to prove that they had checked me.
Every night, every 2 hours?
Every 2 hours.
For years?
For 4 years.
Can you sleep normally now?
Now? I'm getting back to a normal sleep pattern. It's difficult.
How was it that you started to reach out to other reporters, one of whom is Jennifer Hansler, who's here? What was the thinking on reaching out?
I wanted to make sure that my story was being told, and I wanted to make sure that people weren't forgetting. I didn't want it to be put on the back burner and have other affairs of state take over people's interest. I'd made some phone calls, I'd written a lot of letters, and I wanted to speak to the media. So Jennifer was one of the early reporters that I spoke to quite clandestinely from prison.
How many calls in all, Jennifer, did
I think it was about a dozen, but the first one was back in June 2021, and it came as a total surprise because I had known Paul's sister Elizabeth for quite a few months at that point, and she had asked at one point, can I give Paul your address because he enjoys writing letters? And then maybe a month later, he said, actually, can we give him your phone number? And I said, sure, of course, and sort of forgot about it. And then I was sitting at my table in June 2021, and a number just popped up that said Russia. No other caller ID. And I sort of thought maybe it was spam, but I picked it up, and then it's someone saying, this is Paul Whelan. And I was so taken aback, Anderson, that I actually sent a clip of it to Elizabeth to say, hey, is this actually your brother's voice? And she confirmed it was.
Did you hear that Navalny had died?
Yeah, he was murdered by the FSB in a secure prison. That's what happened to him. There's no question in my mind.
And when you heard that, what did you think about for yourself?
I was worried. I was worried that maybe the FSB would poison me or maybe break a bone or injure me to try to get the U.S. to speed up the negotiations for Krasikov being returned. That's what Russia wanted for me.
You were aware of negotiations going on. Obviously, you were in contact with a number of people in the U.S. government. I know you talked to Secretary of State Antony Blinken and other high-level officials. But there was tremendous disappointment as you believed you were going to be part of prisoner swaps, that then you would suddenly see, Trevor Reed, I think was the first sort of high-profile one. You learned that he had been freed, and you were certainly happy for him, but it's got to be incredibly difficult to see the days passing by. I mean, more than 2,000 of them.
Yeah, there were peaks and valleys, to be sure. I was glad that Trevor went home when he did. I was glad that Brittany went home when she did, but I was still there. And I was worried because the U.S. had given up their bargaining position when Victor Bout went home. The U.S. had nothing the Russians wanted, and I was stuck there.
The U.S. traded this guy, Victor Bout, who was an arms dealer, a very high-profile prisoner, and that was part of the deal for Brittany Griner.
Right.
There was a phone call that you made to Jennifer after the Brittany Griner release. This is a part of the call that you made to Jennifer.
I have to say I am greatly disappointed that more has not been done to secure my release. Especially as the 4-year anniversary of my arrest is coming up. I was arrested for a crime that never occurred. I'm happy that Brittany is going home today and that Trevor went home when he did. But I don't understand why I'm still sitting here.
Was that the lowest moment for you?
That was one of two. The second was when my dog died. That was a realization that I wasn't going home to the home that I'd left. But when I realized that the U.S. had given up their bargaining position by sending Victor Bout back to Russia, I was extremely concerned. And yeah, it was a low point. And luckily I had a friend to call, and we discussed it.
Jennifer, you would get letters from.
Yeah, so I actually brought the 4 that I actually received. I don't know if this is all the ones that you sent me, but they would be sent to our bureau in D.C. and then months after the date they were postmarked. So I'm curious, Paul, what you make of seeing these now, all these years later.
This is your handwriting?
Oh yeah.
Very neat.
Yeah, thanks. I sent more than 2,000 letters to my parents. We've got a stack of them at home. I sent letters to the Congresses, to the House and the Senate, the parliaments in Canada and England and Ireland. And they were all the same sort of thing. Talking about the restrictions, how the prison was doing things, how I was. It's interesting to see because there's some of my usual jocularity in these, as well as, some serious things.
How much were you able to kind of remove yourself from your surroundings through writing letters, through reading, through anything else?
Staying in touch with the English language, staying in touch with authors that I was familiar with. That was quite important. I had English books coming in from the consulates through my family. I had a lot of mail that came in. When Brittany was released, she had people write hundreds of letters to me. That was extremely important. I mean, at one point, Jennifer and I were just discussing this, I was writing out ridiculous. Do you remember your ridiculous?
Yes. Yeah.
I would write out, the 10 reasons why I wasn't a spy, or the 10 reasons why, Putin needed to go. All of these kind of funny things that kind of, sprang to mind. I've still got some of them written down.
Really?
Yeah. But that was an important part of staying sane.
What was that flight like? What was, we saw the video of you at the tarmac in, on American soil being greeted by President Biden, by the vice president as well. What was that like?
That was incredible. And we see on the monitor the president putting something on my shirt, and it's actually this.
That's the
flag. Yeah, this is the lapel pin. I didn't realize when we got on the plane, it was a CIA plane flying back, that we were going to meet the president and vice president. I'd been in solitary confinement for the 5 days prior. I hadn't had a shower in 2 weeks. I had clothes on that I'd actually worn when I went to Russia. So
the clothes you're wearing there, those are the clothes you were.
Those are the clothes that, yeah. So they were dirty. I was dirty. On the plane, I had to clean up as well as I could, and
They also look like they don't really fit you anymore.
No, they don't, because I'd lost so much weight. Yeah. You saw me walking off very kind of gingerly, coming down those stairs, holding on, because I didn't have the strength, I didn't have the balance. The malnutrition had taken a toll. It was interesting to see the president. It was interesting to see the vice president, but there was a lot of media too, and I was glad to see them. Those were the people that had supported me.
Well, Paul, it's really an honor to talk to you. I'm so glad you're home.
Yeah, thanks very much.
And Jennifer, thank you, and thanks
you.
for all your work.
Thanks.
And just one final note, the Kremlin has denied any role in Alexei Navalny's death.